Welcome, dear friends, and let me regale you with a tale of profound love, unfathomable loss, and the resilient human spirit's ability to find hope amidst the ashes of tragedy. Enjoy the story. Allison Watson stepped off the Greyhound bus in Oakwood, tears streaming down her face. The cross-country journey from California had been a blur of heartache. Her life had ended the day her fiancé Andrew was killed, but the small life growing inside her refused to let her give up. "I have to keep going. For you, baby girl," she whispered, placing a trembling hand on her rounded belly. Squaring her shoulders, she clutched her battered suitcase and headed towards the town's main street. 2 years earlier, 19-year-old Allison was barely scraping by in Los Angeles. Abandoned at birth and aged out of the foster system, she worked the night shift at a factory while putting herself through technical college classes during the day. Sleep was a luxury she could rarely afford. That all changed the night Andrew Carter strolled into her life. The ruggedly handsome contractor had been hired to install new equipment after the factory's buyout. Allison tried not to stare as his muscular frame moved expertly about the machinery. She snapped out of her daze when her supervisor barked that the new guy needed an experienced operator to train him on the robotic assembly line. "Allison, get over here and show Mr. Carter how it's done," her boss growled. Her cheeks flushed as she approached the tall, sandy-haired Andrew. Hi, I'm Allison. Let me show you the basic controls." Andrew flashed a panty-melting grin. "Please, call me Andrew, and thank you, Allison." By the end of her shift, they had fallen into an easy banter. Andrew offered to drive her home, saying it was the least he could do after she had been so patient walking him through the machinery. A few weeks later, they had their first date at a bowling alley. By the time Andrew's contract ended 6 months later, they were inseparable. Their whirlwind romance hit a speed bump when Allison found out she was pregnant 3 months into their relationship. Terrified of being abandoned again, she blurted out the life-altering news as soon as Andrew arrived at her apartment. To her shock, his face split into a beaming smile. Andrew pulled her into a tight embrace, kissing her deeply. "Marry me, Allison. Let me make an honest woman out of you." Tears of joy rolled down her cheeks as she nodded furiously. "Yes! 1,000 times yes!" But Allison's insecurities resurfaced when Andrew announced they would be moving to his hometown of Oakwood once his job was finished. "My family. They don't know about my childhood. I was afraid they would judge me for being an orphan," Allison confessed during a fragile moment. Andrew stroked her cheek tenderly. "Hey, that's in the past. You're part of my family now, no matter what. I'll explain everything to my mom and little brother before we get there, okay? I love you, baby." With Andrew's reassurance, Allison felt ready to start their new life together. 3 months into her pregnancy, Andrew left for Oakwood ahead of Allison to begin setting up their new home. She expected him to return in a couple weeks, but weeks bled into months without a single word from him. Allison's friends and co-workers whispered that Andrew had gotten cold feet and abandoned her, but she refused to believe the man she loved would do something so callous. When she tried calling his family, she only reached a terse answering machine. Alone and scared, Allison made up her mind. If Andrew wouldn't come to her, she'd go to Oakwood and find him herself. Clutching her swollen belly, Allison pushed open the door to Andrew's former workplace, determined to get answers. Her supervisor's face fell when he saw her. "Allison, didn't anyone tell you?" The man swallowed heavily. "There was an incident shortly after Andrew got back home to Oakwood. He was killed." The words felt like a punch to the gut, stealing Allison's breath away. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing as if her heart would shatter into a million pieces. Through the anguish, she dimly registered the office accountant crouching beside her. "He didn't abandon you, honey," the matronly woman murmured, patting her shoulder. "Andrew was attacked by muggers the day after he got back to his family's place. He didn't suffer. They said it was quick." She pressed a map into Allison's hand. "This is where he's laid to rest. I'm so sorry." Allison wasn't sure how she made it to the serene cemetery, clutching the map and the tattered photograph of her beloved Andrew. She meandered between the old headstones, reading the names until she finally stopped before a shockingly new grave. Andrew James Carter, beloved son and brother. April 10, 1978. August 22, 2022. Cruelly taken too soon. No, she whispered, sinking to her knees as the cold reality washed over her. Andrew was never coming home. She would raise their child alone. A clap of thunder shook her from her reverie as the skies opened up. Allison scrambled for shelter, finding an unlocked crypt blessedly free of coffins. She huddled in the back, wrapping her coat tightly around herself. A shrill ringtone shattered the silence. Jumping in fright, Allison noticed an expensive-looking smartphone lying discarded on the floor. She snatched it up as it rang again, the caller ID showing David. Allison's voice shook as she answered. Hello? Oh, thanks heavens. The man's frantic voice crackled over the line. I'm so sorry to bother you, miss, but I lost my phone at the cemetery yesterday when I was taking some measurements as the architect on a new renovation. You didn't happen to find it, did you? I think so, Allison replied faintly, pressing a hand to her cramping belly. It was ringing in this old crypt. As she tried explaining where she was, a wave of dizziness overcame her. The phone slipped from her hand as the world faded to black. The first thing Allison became aware of was an incessant beeping. Then a bright light assaulted her closed eyelids. She slowly blinked them open, finding herself in a crisp hospital room adorned with bouquets of flowers. A pained groan escaped her lips, drawing the attention of the man seated beside her bed. Allison felt her breath catch in her throat. He looked eerily similar to Andrew, from the tousled sandy hair to the chiseled jawline. Only his eyes, a warm hazel instead of cobalt blue, proved he wasn't her late fiancé. You're awake, thanks goodness, the man breathed in relief. You gave me quite a scare, miss? Allison, she replied hoarsely. Allison Watson, and you're David? He gave a sad smile. David Carter, yes. I'm afraid you already know my older brother. The weight of grief slammed into Allison's chest, but she fought to keep her composure. You found me at the cemetery. Is the baby? Your little one is perfectly healthy, Miss Watson. As is only fitting, seeing as you're carrying my niece or nephew. A throat cleared from the doorway. Allison glanced over as a refined woman stepped into the room, her chestnut curls glistening with distinguished streaks of silver. The moment her gaze landed on Allison, her eyes filled with tears. Oh, you poor brave dear. The woman rushed to Allison's bedside, cupping her cheek with a tenderness Allison had never known. David told me everything. I'm Julie, Andrew's mother, and you're the love of his life, the one he never stopped talking about before Julie dissolved into sobs, clinging to Allison as a mother mourns a child's tragedy. Allison stared at the ceiling, fighting a torrent of emotions that pounded against the flimsy dam inside her. David reached out and squeezed her hand. 2 years later, Allison gazed out the bay window of the Carter family's stately Oakwood home, watching an energetic toddler chase a rambunctious golden retriever across the lush backyard. Karina, come give Grandma sugar. Julie's melodious voice rang out from the kitchen. Allison smiled wistfully as her strawberry blonde daughter abandoned her game, pudgy legs carrying her back towards the open patio door and the waiting embrace of her doting grandmother. Julie Carter had opened her heart and home to Allison without a second thought. Just look at my beautiful girls, the refined matriarch sighed contentedly, scooping up a giggling Karina and peppering her rosy cheeks with kisses. Allison still marveled at the family she had inherited upon Andrew's tragic passing. Julie had not only vowed to care for Allison, but to raise her granddaughter Karina as her own, in honor of her firstborn son's memory. Between Julie's bottomless retirement funds and Andrew's modest life insurance payout, Allison was able to focus on continuing her education at the local university to become a lawyer. She owed everything to the Carters, especially David. Trailing one hand across the cool glass, Allison watched as Andrew's younger brother jogged across the yard after the rambunctious pup, his t-shirt hugging his toned physique in a way that had become increasingly distracting to Allison over the past couple years. She and David had forged an undeniable bond through their shared grief for Andrew and dedication to Karina's well-being. Initially, their relationship had been one of somber camaraderie, two lost souls clinging to the reminder of their loved one. But recently, the air had been charged with the delicious tension of burgeoning desire. Allison knew Julie sensed it acutely, her eyes sparkling with maternal mischief whenever she caught her son and daughter-in-law trading longing glances. It couldn't have been clearer. Julie wanted Allison and David to find happiness again in each other's arms. But could Allison allow herself that joy after the incalculable loss of her first great love? A knock at the patio door startled Allison from her reverie. She spun around to find David grinning roguishly, t-shirt damp with exertion. "Aunt Allison," he greeted cheerily, using the moniker that made Allison's heart flutter with wistful longing. "I thought I might take my favorite niece out for an ice cream, if you two lovely ladies would care to join." Allison giggled at Karina's squeal of delight from the kitchen. "I don't think she'd ever pass that up." Once again, her eyes lingered on the sharp lines of David's chest and the way his smile crinkled the corners of his eyes so charmingly. He really was heartbreakingly handsome. And when he looked at Allison with such warmth and tenderness, she felt her defenses begin to crumble. "Ice cream would be perfect," Allison heard herself replying in a slightly breathless tone. "Let me just grab Karina's sweater and we'll—" Julie materialized suddenly behind them, holding Karina, who was already bundled up adorably. "Why don't you two kids go ahead?" The sly grin playing across her lips spoke volumes. "Someone on one time might do you good." Mother and daughter shared a knowing wink. Allison felt heat bloom in her cheeks, but before she could protest, she found herself being ushered towards the hallway, with David's warm palm at the small of her back. An electric tingle spread through her at his proximity. "Shall we?" David asked lowly, his hazel eyes smoldering in a way that had Allison's pulse racing. Perhaps it was time she finally allowed her heart to embrace the future instead of clinging to the past. Unable to find her voice, Allison simply nodded and let David lead her towards the waiting car and their next chapter. Julie watched them go with a contented smile. She had sworn to give Karina the family Allison and Andrew would have created together. Now it seemed the missing piece had finally slotted into place. "That's my girl," the proud grandmother chuckled, bouncing her granddaughter playfully. "True love has come around for you at last."